All right. Good evening, everyone. We want to welcome you to the League of Women Voters Candidate Forum for Fargo Legislative District 41. So tonight we have 5 of the 6 candidates that were able to join us tonight, and Michelle Strinden did provide us with a statement, which I'll read here momentarily. First, just a little bit about the League. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. We also work to increase the understanding of major public policy issues. We want to thank the City of Fargo for allowing us to use the City Commission chamber for the forum. We want to express our great thanks to all the city employees who have assisted us in setup and videotaping for tonight's event. The forum they have it set so that it is being broadcast right now or streamed live on the City of Fargo's Facebook page, and then also the link is available there after the forum is over. And on the League of Women Voters page, we will link to that as well. On behalf of the League, I want to thank all the candidates for attending and the members of the audience for their participation. So how the forum operates, we do take all the questions from the audience, and audience members have already been submitting those tonight. So if you do have a question, please grab one of the note cards from one of the volunteers. When your question is complete, just hold it up and they'll grab it and bring it up to me. As far as the questions go, we'll start on this side with candidate Davison. You would actually start with the opening statement, and then candidate Thomas, you would get the first question, and then kind of so on down the line. Each candidate will get 1.5 minutes for an opening statement, and then 1.5 minutes to answer each question, and then we'll do a 1.5 minute closing statement at the end. Mary is going to be timing, so please kind of keep an eye on her when she holds up that stop sign. We just ask that you kind of wrap up your statement once you see that stop sign that she holds up. All right, and so with that, I will start by reading Michelle Strinden's statement, and then we'll get into your opening statements. So the statement from Michelle Strinden: I apologize that I was not able to attend tonight as I had a previously scheduled conflict at our church. My background in public education and community service. I worked in the West Fargo School District as a school counselor before deciding to stay at home to raise our kids 15 years ago. Since then, I've volunteered throughout the community and at my children's schools. My husband Tom and I live in District 41 for 22 years with our 4 children ages 12 to 21 years old. If elected to serve the residents of District 41, my priorities will be to strengthen our state's educational system by improving literacy rates, lower the tax burden on hardworking North Dakotans, and to eliminate harmful regulations. If you would like to reach out to me with any questions or comments, you can find my contact information at my Facebook page or at michellestrinden.com or strinden.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Best, Michelle. So that was our statement from Michelle Strinden, who was unable to join us tonight. So we will get started with our opening statements. Candidate Davison.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for the opportunity to be here tonight, and also the City of Fargo for allowing us to use the chamber. It's been an honor to serve District 41 as your senator the last 4 years. I've worked in public education. A little bit about myself: I've worked in public education for 20 years. And in my current position of the last 14 years, I'm the executive director of the Southeast Education Cooperative. And each day I go to work, I have the privilege of working with K-12 schools, member schools throughout Southeast North Dakota, with Fargo and West Fargo being members in our consortium. I really have a passion for education, and I really want to improve the quality of education and the access to education for all students. I think one of the accomplishments over my 4-year term has been the investment in early childhood education. I think it's really critical that we continue to broaden that expansion in early childhood education and have more access across the state. We've seen an increase, and I think that was a wise investment. The other item is really the important piece is the behavioral health. And we need to invest in behavioral health services, direct services, partnering schools and private partners together at an earlier age. And so I look forward to the discussion tonight on those topics. And again, thank you for having us.
Candidate Thomas.
First of all, I want to thank the League of Women Voters and the City of Fargo for allowing this forum for us to share our visions and our ideas, and to candidate Roars for finding me a height-appropriate chair. working across the aisle, as she pointed out. I grew up in a little town in South Dakota and taught school there for several years before following my husband and his career to Oregon, where our son was born and reared for the first part of his life. For retirement, we made the unusual choice of moving to North Dakota, which today I kind of wonder about that decision, but we wanted to be closer to our family and our roots. Most of that time I've lived here in District 41, and my focus is on the future of my grandchildren. I've seen the cost to my son of daycare so that he and his wife can go to school. It's ridiculous. We have to find some ways to try to assist families so they can go to work. I want to advocate for a balanced budget that puts people, not corporations, first, and investing in societal infrastructure as well as actual infrastructure.
All right, candidate Anderson.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone that's in the room for coming, and the League of Women Voters, and for your questions and your interest in the entire process. So I'm a retired banker, economist, and I did a lot of community involvement. And then 4 years ago, I ran and got elected, and I just didn't know what to expect. But I have to tell you, I love this job. And I believe I'm a good representative for District 41, and I want to keep it. I want to go back to Bismarck because there's more work to be done. I don't believe our residents of 41 elected us to lower their taxes. We have very low income and corporate taxes. The tax that I think gives people financial anxiety right now is personal or property tax, especially on a fixed income. I believe they want representatives that will fund long-term solutions for our priorities. We can only appropriate for one biennium according to our Constitution, but we can plan to have priorities. My priorities would be strong education, including pre-K, retain and recruit a workforce. We're the drunkest state according to USA. We need help with addiction. We need to diversify our economy. And I think we can do all of that if we do a little bit more long-range planning, even if we can only fund it every 2 years. But, okay, stop. Thank you. I got going.
Candidate Carlson.
She's tough. Well, I want to thank the League of Women Voters as well. This is I've been doing this for quite a few years now, and it's always a good opportunity for us to engage with everybody else and talk about the issues. I've been in the legislature since 1993. My background is that when I got out of college at NDSU, I was a teacher at Agassiz. And then I sold real estate in the summertime to make ends meet. And in 1980, I started a construction company where we built over 400 living units around the city, a lot of those being in District 41. So, and as a legislator, I've served on multiple committees, but the last 10 years I've been the leader in the House. And it's been an honor and a privilege to work with my caucus on what I think is shaping the future direction of North Dakota. We've accomplished great things. We have great things that yet need to be done. We get accolades for many things about what we've done as a state, but we still have to make sure that we protect our city. You know, we need to make sure that we deal with the flood control issues and the water supply issues. We need to make sure we finally fix this workforce shortage thing. And enough talk. It's time to have programs where we coordinate from K-12 all the way to our 2-year campuses to make sure we're filling those workforce needs. And then there's a lot of talk about research and how you fund research. I think it's a good idea to fund our research. It helps our economy grow, but we need a funding plan to make it work. And I think those are the kind of things that we'll address and we'll fix in the future. And I look forward to the opportunity to dialogue with our citizens about the accomplishments, but also about the future.
Candidate Maidenwald.
You pronounced my name right, so thank you. Did it great. My name is Brandon Maidenwald, and I'm running for the North Dakota House. Thank you to the League of Women Voters. I'll echo that as well as everybody who came here tonight who decided that they wanted to take part in the process. We really appreciate it. I'm a second-generation entrepreneur. My parents started a restaurant in Lidgewood, North Dakota, and ran it successfully for 20 years. And from the time I was old enough to take an order, I learned the lessons that they taught me, which is that if you listen to your customers, if you keep the promises that you make, if you work hard every day, then really anything is possible. And in 2011, with nothing more than a $100 bill and a dream, I decided to follow in their footsteps. and start my own company. And Simply Made Apps has been very successful. Those are the exact same skills that we need in the North Dakota legislature, and I don't believe we have enough of those skills there right now. I think that we need a listener and a problem solver. So those are the exact lessons I plan to bring to help balance North Dakota's budget, to keep our property tax owners the promises that we've made, to reinvest in education, and NDSU, which is an economic engine for us, as well as a way to solve our critical workforce needs. So the North Dakota House needs a fresh perspective from someone that wasn't responsible for the budget mess that we're in right now. And trust me, as an entrepreneur, I know how to balance a budget while still investing in the future. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I look forward to your questions.
All right, thank you. So our first question, we'll start with candidate Thomas. How do you ensure our communities, or how would you ensure that our communities have the resources they need to fund critical infrastructure projects?
That's a great question, and it's pretty complicated. But one of the issues we've talked about is replacing the oil extraction tax to gain more money there, spending some of the interest on the legacy fund, and taking the changes we've made to income taxes for companies that live out of state, regaining some of those, so that we spend the money here on our people and our things, and the people have the money to spend in our economy that will grow our economy.
All right, candidate Anderson.
Thank you. I think one of the reasons that we can help local communities with their infrastructure needs, besides pushing some dollars from the state down to the local economies, or the local subdivision, which makes sense. I'm a proponent of using the principle of the legacy fund for bonding. I mean, I looked at the investments in our legacy fund, and we have a global infrastructure investment. So we're financing bridges and roads all over the world. So I think if we could do 2% for 30 years, Mayor Tim Mahoney said he could fund through the local budgeting process. And I think that would be a great investment. We're talking maybe $280 million at 2%. Well, our fund is going to be $6 billion. So it's not going to impact the earnings on the fund.
Representative Carlson?
Well, I think
Candidate
it's,
Carlson?
you need to look back at history. And recently, we put a proposal out that called for taking about $230 million of our infrastructure fund that we have set up and moving that into a bucket. And by the way, that is oil money. So we're taking oil money from the West to build infrastructure in every place but the West, but they're also still getting their money. And then distribute that to cities, counties, and townships. Cass County and the city of Fargo will receive $30 million for infrastructure projects around the city and the county. And they can do this without having to have the taxpayer pay for that particular project. Whereas if we didn't have that money, they'd be paying it out of their pocket or in their special assessments. So I think that our plan is solid. The legacy fund is a whole nother debate. I'm not going to get into that at this point in time, but I think the fact that we have established an infrastructure fund and that we're properly using that to build the infrastructure of the state is really good.
Candidate Maidenwald.
To speak to the Representative Carlson's proposal, there are parts of it that I'm certainly in favor of as well. I do think that we need to bring some of those infrastructure dollars out east. I am not as big of a fan of the idea of budgeting by bucket, just because I think that by budgeting by bucket, you end up creating things that are harder to dismantle. And if you want to have smaller government, creating something for airport needs, as an example, that's at the end of his proposal. Airport needs might not always be in place for the foreseeable future. We might have them now, we might not have them 10 years from now, and so I prefer to have the legislators do more of that appropriating ourselves. I do want to point out that the $10,000 per township is important, and the last legislative session, the Republican supermajority and the governor let that lapse. And while I know that Representative Carlson's plan would put that back, that was a critical mistake, I think, in our part. We needed to make sure that that township dollar was there. Townships do not have a lot of money to spend on infrastructure.
Candidate Davison.
Well, going last, we're always covering what everybody else has a little bit, but I think we've come out, the Republicans have come out with a good infrastructure bill that's been vetted over the last few months, investing dollars from from the oil and bringing some of those dollars out east here. And certainly I support that. And I think what we've heard from Mayor Mahoney and Mayor Dardis in Fargo and West Fargo, they certainly support that. And I think that's a good start for the infrastructure debate and how to do some catch-up on that. There are other things. Certainly, you could talk about the legacy fund. You could talk about raising gas tax. There are other options that are available, but I think the Republican leadership has provided a tool with the infrastructure bill that we brought forward.
Thank you. So for our next question, we'll start with candidate Anderson. So that was interesting. We had two kind of dueling questions that I think actually kind of speak to some of the balance that you need to find as a legislator. So one person asked, what have you done or will you do to ensure Fargo's needs and voice are heard in Bismarck? And then someone else asked, how do you balance the needs of the district with that of the whole state? So clearly, the people you represent want to make sure that their needs and voice are being heard in Bismarck, but also, of course, you're also making policy for the whole state. So how do you find a balance to that?
Well, actually, I think that the residents of our constituents in District 41, I think are like a lot of constituents all over the state. So I think if I look at what I think best represents my district, probably represents the rest of the state. And I'll just go into one little thing. We're probably tired of it, but I did the medical marijuana bill, and I knew that that was something that the people of North Dakota wanted. And it passed with flying colors. And it was a constituent, a 64-year-old stockbroker in my district that asked me to do it. So I think if I represent my District 41 residents, I'm really representing, I think, a lot of the wants and needs of the entire state.
Candidate Carlson.
Well, I'm in a little different position than a lot of legislators are because I represent, as a majority leader of a caucus of 81 Republicans, I not only have my particular district to worry about, or my city, but it's also the entirety of the state. When you balance the budget, you balance it for the whole state. When you pass laws, you pass laws for the whole state. And it's very important to remember that some of the most important things to part of our district is there's been times when half of our district has been underwater, where we have flooded to the point where people were asked to, in fact, they wanted to evacuate our city at some point in time. So our job is to make sure that we have craft policy, good public policy, that's for the betterment of all the state. And by doing that, I will agree, and this isn't very often, I'll agree with Representative Anderson, that I believe that our district reflects the state. And I think that by doing what we think is best for the state, we also are doing what's best for our district.
And candidate Maidenwald.
Yeah, I'll echo some of those same things. I've knocked on a lot of doors as a function of this campaign. I've met and knocked on nearly 3,000 doors myself personally. And when I do that and I talk to other candidates that are also out knocking doors, we're talking about the same issues in all parts of the state. We're talking about property taxes. We're talking about higher education. We're talking about workforce issues, and we're talking about health care. So I think that I will agree that oftentimes District 41 represents a lot of other people. To specifically say, though, I would be elected to represent District 41. That's going to be my primary concern. Every other place in the state also has representatives. I'm not intending to be combative, but we have to make sure we look out for the constituents. That's our job.
Candidate Davison.
I would agree a lot with what has been said. I'll use one example that I think is important to District 41 is I don't think our state employees or our university system employees can go another biennium without a raise, and so I would advocate strongly for a raise for our state and our university system employees. I think we have a lot of those in District 41. In education, I think it's really important that education is common throughout all districts, obviously, in North Dakota. I think we need to focus a little bit more on behavioral health services and school and teacher safety. And some of those investments, I think as you invest earlier in children and you provide direct services into the schools with private partners, and it will pay off in the long run, not only for the families in District 41, but the families across the state.
Candidate Thomas.
District 41 is full of young people and young families, and once again, I say I'm focusing on the future. All of our issues are human issues. We all want a good education for our children. We all want taxes that we can afford to pay and have enough money to spend in our economy. Behavioral health has become a huge issue in the state with the opioid crisis and suicides and drunkenness, as Pam brought up. So all of these things need to be funded, focusing on families, young people, and the future, and how can we make it better for all of the people of the state, which 41 is part of. And as Brandon said, we represent District 41.
All right, thank you. So for our next question, we'll start with candidate Carlson. What approach should the state take to provide quality education statewide?
Well, that's not a minute and a half answer, by the way. But education has always been a priority of the legislature. You know, we have not only K-12, but higher education. Since I've been a majority leader, we have taken the funding of K-12 education from 52% of the costs being paid by the state and 48% being paid by the local to 72% being paid by the state and only 28% by the locals. So our commitment is there to education, and we have debates over how the formula should read and how we handle rapid growth payments to cities like West Fargo that are growing so fast, and we don't pay them till a year later when we get their count. We don't pay them right away. There's things we can do to make it better. We also need to expect quality. You need to look at the results and say, are we getting exactly, are our kids getting smarter? Are they getting the kind of education we want them to have? Having been in the classroom for 6 years, I can tell you it's very crucial that we get these kids and that we make them competitive for the world market they're going to be into. So we're committed to it, not only money, but we're committed to the quality that we expect in return.
Candidate Maidenwald.
Education is the silver bullet. Education's everything. Education is what will help us solve our workforce needs. Education is what will lead to a reduction in crime. Education is our opportunity to intervene earlier in behavioral health crisis. Education is exactly what we need to spend more of our time and more of our dollars and more of our energy on. In my case, I would strongly oppose further cuts to education. Holding education harmless, which is what the last legislative session did, is not harmless when you have to deal with inflation. Inflation means your buying power goes down year after year. We need to redouble our commitments when it comes to education in this state. It's going to solve all of our problems.
Candidate Davison.
Again, that's a big answer about quality education, but specifically for District 41 and for the Fargo Public Schools, I think we need to focus on some funding for EL services. I think we see, as much as we've seen a growth in our economy, we also see that people move here for services from a standpoint of kids with autism or kids with learning disabilities. We need to make more investment into hiring those types of professionals that are in schools and working in schools. In addition to that, I think it's really important from the EL services that we engage and have the ability to hire social workers, so we're engaging the families in education in District 41 and with our schools here in Fargo, because I think the more you get your community involved in your school district and the more you get your families involved in your school district, the better opportunity you're going to have to help all kids be successful.
Candidate Thomas.
One of the ideas that's been talked about a lot tonight, and I'm completely in favor of, is the career-based partnership between the schools and businesses in the community. We have a severe lack of qualified workers for many of the jobs in the community, and one way to do that is to attract students who are interested in those trades young and trade them up for the jobs that are here. Also, some forms of tuition assistance and help. I know when I went to college, we had a program where they would buy down part of your student debt if you stayed in the state and worked there. This is something certainly that the Bank of North Dakota could work with, along with tuition assistance with some of the money they're making off the student loans that we charge to the students that go to our schools.
Candidate Anderson.
Thank you. Well, I'm a big proponent of pre-K, and I think the only way out of poverty is education. I totally agree with Senator Davidson. We need to put those dollars into the early intervention. We also have, last time I looked, like 360 on the waiting list for Head Start. And we're one of the only few states that do not use state dollars for Head Start. And I think that's a mistake. I think we ought to use state money to help those young families and those young kids. And from higher ed, I think we ought to help our North Dakota students, graduates with tuition assistance and their student loans. And that is a huge workforce issue, and I think it would make a big difference and our rates would go up as far as graduation. They'll stay in the community. I'm not advocating free tuition for everyone, but I did put in a proposal called Senior Promise last time, where we would pay the fourth year as a senior your tuition, and also with a certificate in 2-year schools.
All right, so our next question, we'll start with candidate Maidenwald. So there's this question was asked in the last forum, and we had a different person ask it this time. So what is your position on Measure 1, which is the North Dakota state measure that we're going to be voting on in November, related to creating kind of an ethics commission and as a anti-corruption in government? So what is your position on Measure 1 and why?
That's a great question. I am for more transparency in government. Likely everybody at this table will tell you that same thing, but I believe that we need to meet that challenge with some of these proposals. So I'm in favor of Measure 1. I believe that the idea of an ethics commission is one that is warranted. I think that it's very difficult to ask legislators to be a check on themselves. And I like the idea of another outside organization appointed by legislators as well as the governor that would see to make sure that these things are taken care of.
Candidate Davison?
Yes, I think in the last legislative process that we did improve transparency in the campaign finance. I find it interesting that Brandon wants to reduce government, but yet he wants to build a whole nother section of government that's going to oversee the legislature. So I'm not quite sure how that works out exactly, but I don't know that Measure 1 is a good measure. The ACLU is against Measure 1. I typically don't agree with them, and so I guess my preference is probably a no vote on Measure 1, but at the end of the day, I'm not sure it's going to have a big impact on how I vote red or green on any particular issue within the legislative process.
Candidate Thomas?
Well, I usually do agree with the ACLU, but in this case, I disagree with them. I think sunshine and transparency are increasingly important in our governmental functions. I feel in the past it's been misused by some of the people here in North Dakota and in the country. I think that a nonpartisan group that would oversee this and make sure that monies were spent the way they were supposed to, and that we could all see clearly where the money is coming from and who is speaking to our legislators is increasingly important in our world, and therefore I would support Measure 1. It may not be perfect, but it's a start, and we can get started on having a more transparent election process.
Candidate Anderson?
Thank you. I'm going to vote yes on Measure 1. I think it's interesting that we all say, well, there's no problem with ethics and conflicts of interest and whatever, but yet we're all afraid of having a measure that says we're going to have an ethics commission. And I really believe that our state legislators shouldn't travel the globe on anyone else's, only on their own dime. And I just don't understand why people are afraid of this. To me, it is just, it's taking money out of government, and I know that might be a pipe dream, but we got to go for it. And I'm a strong proponent of Measure 1.
Candidate Carlson?
Well, now we don't agree anymore.
No,
Now we don't agree. I couldn't be more against this measure for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's not an initiated measure. It is a constitutional change. When you put it in the Constitution, that better be something extremely special and extremely important to alter your Constitution. This, setting up a non-elected commission, and if you read through the measure, you'd say, where did they get all the money to get the signatures? The $240,000. I can tell you where they got it. It was bought and paid for by people out of this state of North Dakota. This was not a North Dakota initiative. we need to be very careful when out-of-staters who want to limit free speech, and by the way, when the Fargo or in the Chamber of North Dakota and the Civil Liberties Union are on the same side opposing this, this is a dangerous measure. It has all kinds of things in it. It says the measure would give the commission authority to adopt rules related to transparency, corruption, elections, and lobbying, and to investigate any allegation of the article of the Constitution related statutes and the commission's rules. The measure would require us to appropriate funds to the commission. We have no idea what that is or what it does. It's a major change to our Constitution. Nobody's in favor of bad ethics and bad corruption in government. This is not the right solution.
Okay, so our next question, we will start with candidate Davison. How does the state generate income and balance the budget to create a strong economy for the future without dependence on oil income?
Well, I think right now, I think we continue to, we're going to continue to have oil income. So we always take some dollars out of our, from the oil and put it into the general fund. I think there are some opportunities to look at additional revenue. I mentioned one earlier. It could potentially be a 1 cent raise in the gas tax. You could look at the increasing the tax on tobacco. I was a proponent to do that in the initiated measure back in 2017, I believe it was, or 16. So I think the most important thing, though, is that we don't need to grow government. I think some of what we need to do is that we need to look at some of the things that maybe aren't as productive, or from a, we need to look at the data, and we need to understand clear, and we may need to make some tougher decisions too based on where we're spending our dollars. And so those would be a couple of the ideas that I would have.
Candidate Thomas?
Yep, oil is definitely going to be a part of our future for a long time coming. I just got back from Europe and I saw all the wonderful wind farms and solar farms there, so I do think that an investment in alternative energy wouldn't be a bad idea to start bringing in money there. I agree with Senator Davison on increasing the tax on tobacco might be a good idea. I heard tourism mentioned earlier in the tech sector. Those are both ways that we could grow our economy. And getting back some of the money, I repeat, that we're sending out of state to companies that are not located here by cutting their income taxes, when that money could be better spent here and kept here in our own economy.
Candidate Anderson?
Thank you. I think we definitely should raise the tobacco tax. We're at 44 cents. Minnesota's at 3.04 cents. I mean, every state around us. And that would generate $62 million per biennium. And I think all of that revenue should go for addiction issues. And let's not be the drunkest state. And let's not a meth mother that lost her baby and we found it in a slough. That is not North Dakota. We need to figure out how to build our social infrastructure. And that's why I think the 230 million, we're talking about 30 million coming back to Fargo and Cass County. We ought to use that 30 million by bonding in the legacy fund, and the 30 million should go for social infrastructure in Cass County and in Fargo. And of course, you all know I'm a big proponent of putting the oil extraction tax back to 6.5%. I don't think we should be spending, that money should be leaving, unless you own a lot of stock in Continental Oil. I don't know any other North Dakotan that makes money on the reduction in the oil extraction tax.
Candidate Carlson?
And we will
Could you
disagree
repeat-
on that one.
Could you read the question again? Because I don't think she
I
was
certainly
quite, she
can.
just
So-
circled the wagons there.
Oh,
How does the state generate income and balance the budget and while creating a strong economy for the future without a dependence on oil income?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that income is divided many ways, and we only take $400 million out of almost $3 billion and put it into the general fund to fund general government. So that other money goes to counties, it goes to the legacy fund, it goes to water. And for flood protection, it's paying for our diversion when it happens. It's going for education. It's going for all sort of infrastructure as well. So that money is already being filtered. Last biennium, we had to take a few of those funds and balance the budget we've left. But we took a $1.7 billion budget and did not raise people's taxes. We reduced the size of government, made it more transparent and more efficient, and that's the same thing we always have to do. We have to make a list of our priorities, and then we make sure we fund those. I agree on the salaries. You can't go another 2 years without giving our employees salary raises. But remember, when you do that, a 2 and 2 multiplier happens everywhere. It happens in human services, it happens in DD providers, it happens in education funding. So when you do this, it's got to be an overall commitment on the part of the state, and it's not by raising taxes, it's by being more efficient in government and making wise use of the money we have.
Candidate Maidenwald.
I thought it was interesting that that Representative Carlson mentioned he didn't raise taxes. I should have brought a copy of my property tax statement with me, which went up 19%. But I will say this much about the oil economy. Oil is a big part of our infrastructure or of our money. So is agriculture. We need to grow that third leg, and we've been talking about this for a long time, but we don't seem to get as much progress on it as we can. I think that we need to invest in education, and we need to keep young people here. Young people here will start businesses and help us in those endeavors. The other thing we need to focus on is making strategic investments. One great example of that is the drone program going on in Grand Forks. Strategic investment there is creating jobs, and we know that the state of New York is now investing a substantial amount of money in their drone program. We need to make sure that we are investing enough to keep pace. We could become the Silicon Valley of drones in the United States with proper investment.
Okay. And Candidate Davis, you started that question, is that right?
I think so.
Okay. I made it through the first one without that happening, but yeah, the second one in a row, it's getting a little tougher. Okay, so Candidate Thomas, this next one starts with you then. Do you support early education programs such as pre-K for all citizens, low-income citizens, or neither?
Oh, absolute, that's an easy one. All incomes, all students, all children. Their future is started there. So many children start behind home plate, and they have so far to catch up. And I see the difference between my grandchildren, who had the advantage of going to a wonderful preschool, and the students who don't have that advantage, and they start so far behind when they get to first grade and the elementary grades, if they haven't had that opportunity. And if we don't start them out at that age, having been a high school teacher, by the time they get to me, it's too late. You've got to start them right off the bat. I'm a huge proponent of education at all levels, and anything we can do to fund that fully, completely behind it.
Candidate Anderson?
Totally agree with Paula on this one, obviously. I'm a proponent of pre-K, early intervention. All the research says it makes a huge difference. But right now, the only people that can have pre-K are those that can afford it. And I think that's wrong. I don't think a young child, that whether they get pre-K or not, should be, what size house they live in. We need to have every one of our children that opportunity. And I also think it's rather interesting that this was a couple years ago, the legislature said you can put pre-K, but we aren't going to fund it. You look at Cass County, I look at Leeds, I look at Fordville. A lot of the small communities all over the state are doing pre-K. And Fargo, West Fargo, none of the large cities are. So as a legislature, I think we need to say pre-K is important to every child in every community all across the state.
Candidate Carlson?
Yes, did she say senator?
Did I say
Oh,
senator?
no.
I'm sorry.
I don't want to get in Kyle's way here. I think it's important to understand that
Yeah.
everybody understands, and being a former teacher myself, I understand the value of early childhood education. I'm all in favor of it as long as it's a local decision, and the local people, if they want to pay for it, they should be able to do that. We are criticized because we have tried to raise the bar on our funding from the state level for K through 12. We have a constitutional responsibility to fund that level of education. I think that if the local communities want it, they should be able to go to their voters and fund it if they want to do that. Each year, and don't forget, there is programs, and there are programs in North Dakota. Each year, North Dakota gets $21 million for Head Start. $21 million. And that goes throughout the state for these programs to do just exactly what you people are talking about. I'm all for it, but I think it should be a local decision. Remember, we fund education. The decisions for how it's handled are, for the most part, are local decisions, and we need to leave it with those local people.
Candidate Maidenwald?
I'm a big believer in education, as I think I mentioned earlier, and I'm certainly a believer in pre-K and early childhood education. I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and they've all had the advantages of early childhood education, and they're way smarter than I was at that age, I think. So I'm definitely a big supporter of these programs, and if we can make this universal so that everybody can have that opportunity, then that's what I would strive to do.
Candidate Davison?
Well, I think the goal is for everybody to have access to early childhood education or pre-K education. I don't think that's going to happen in one biennium, but I certainly think that we need to broaden it. Currently, we fund it to a level that is limited by those that qualify for free and reduced lunch. So I think we need to, when we get back to the session, we need to look a little bit closer and figure out how do we broaden that, and how do, like Representative Carlson said, how do we work with our local districts so that they can figure out a way to be a greater participant in the early childhood education, because they don't have the physical space here in Fargo and West Fargo. If they were going to fund a pre-K program, they would not have the physical space. So from a local control standpoint, that still is a critical piece, but we need to continue to broaden our investment in early childhood education. I think that's critical.
All right, so for our next question, we'll start with Candidate Anderson. Do you feel the Attorney General should have restrictions on the litigation that he or she engages in our name?
Whoa, let me think about that. Restrictions on the Attorney General. Can you read that to me again?
Yeah, so do you feel the Attorney General should have restrictions on the litigation that he or she engages in our name? So I'm thinking probably back to a few, probably over the last couple bienniums, there have been some laws that have been passed, or either at the federal level where then the North Dakota Attorney General gets involved. And I'm thinking maybe what we're really getting at here is that then it costs North Dakotans money. So should there be some restrictions on when the Attorney General can decide to bring litigation?
Well, I think so, especially when we're bringing litigation that's happened in the last couple sessions that at the get-go was unconstitutional. And we spent millions of dollars on some of that litigation. And whether, how do we decide what citizens believe in what? First of all, I don't think we should have gotten into the latest litigation regarding our health care. And others may disagree with me, but I think that was a bad idea. I think that, and even in our last legislative session, where does that set in? The governor vetoes, the legislature says no. I mean, I think we need to have a better definition of what the Attorney General, who do they represent? Who are they fighting for? They're not fighting for me on this last one.
Candidate Carlson.
Well, many times over my tenure in the legislature, we have funded litigation and set up funds for the Attorney General to use on our behalf. And I'll give you an example. When we couldn't get railroad cars to get our farmers' grain out of the state, we set up a fund that said, you go after those guys, and in the end, guess what? We got more railroad cars. And we had more delivery of our product out of the state. He has been involved in some that he's won and some that he's lost. We set up a litigation fund for him. I trust him. He's our chief law enforcement officer of the state. He is defending the interest of North Dakotans, and I believe he's doing the best job he can to defend those interests. And when they make sense, he should be doing them. He's not going to be right on every one because he's lost a few of them. But on the other hand, he is defending the state of North Dakota, and I trust his judgment.
Candidate Maidenwald.
Well, I'll echo Al, actually. You know what? We don't agree on a lot of things, but we're going to agree on this. I think that there is a limit on the Attorney General, and it's called an election. In fact, he's up for election right now this year. And so I think that the citizens of North Dakota, it's incumbent on them that if they're not happy with the litigation that he's chosen to pursue, then the citizens should vote him out. And that's their check on them. I also think that it's incumbent on legislators, and that's, of course, the job I'm asking for today. I think it's incumbent on us to make sure we don't pass laws that he has to go and defend in court when in some of these cases where these laws have been challenged. So that's on us as legislators to make sure we don't set him up so that he's going to constantly have to defend the decisions that we make.
Candidate Davison.
Yep, and that would make 3 in a row. I mean, that's why we have elections. Yeah, if you don't like what the Attorney General's doing, then you vote against him. I mean, I'm not a micromanager. I'm not a micromanager at my work. You empower people to do a job. We're not always going to agree with whether we're in the same party or not. We're not always going to agree with elected officials on the decisions that they make. But I wouldn't want to put too many restrictions or micromanage what the Attorney General is doing. I'll be just like every other citizen and go to the ballot box, and that will be my yay or nay on those types of decisions.
And Candidate Thomas.
It's hard to argue with the fact that the election is the determiner. I have a great deal of concern with some of the social lawsuits that he has joined that I don't necessarily think reflect the will of the people. My district people are not so much focused on what the Attorney General is doing, but what's going on in their lives, and that's why my focus continues to be on education and making lives better for people here, and hopefully having an Attorney General that will reflect the will of the people he serves.
All right, so for our next question, we'll start with Candidate Carlson. So we have kind of a lengthy question, which I'm going to kind of paraphrase down and maybe kind of rephrase into, I think, really what the questioner is getting at is, if you are elected when serving in the legislature, how can you make sure that you are still connected to the constituents and being able to listen to them when you are in Bismarck? So if you are currently serving or have served before, what avenues have you kept open for communication with your constituents when in Bismarck? And if you are hoping to become and serve in Bismarck in this next session, what is your plan to have open lines of communication with the constituents in your district?
Well, I can tell you it's a lot easier than it used to be with all the avenues that you have with the new media, with Facebook, with all the ways we have the email. Our addresses are all public. I come home every weekend. And if there were more forums, we'd have them, but very seldom do they have them in Fargo anymore. And if there's one disappointment that I have as a legislator is very seldom do we get engaged with our constituents. The rural people seem to get many more phone calls than we do and many more emails than we do. So we're accessible. We have all of our sites are posted. The door in my office is always open, and if people from Fargo are there in District 41, I would hope that they came to my office and talked about any concerns they had. So I think we're very accessible, and I think that if the door is open and the avenues are there for them, if they want to get a hold of us, there are plenty of opportunities.
Candidate Maidenwald.
As a small business owner, I'm successful because I listen to my customers, and we answer all of the emails that are sent into my company. We return those in hours and not days, and we do them ourselves instead of outsourcing it because we believe that that's the only way to build a product that the people really want. And I think that being a legislator, we need to do that same kind of thing. I absolutely want to talk about the Sunday closing law, because that's an issue that was near and dear to me, and it's something that I decided I wanted to be more involved in. When I emailed Representative Anderson, she got back to me within a day, and I was just a constituent. And she got back to me, and she decided she wanted to propose this thing and went forward. I also want to thank Senator Davison for his work. He stood up on the floor of the Senate and talked about that issue as well. So I did email Al. I didn't hear back, but I'm sure it's just in the spam filter. So.
Candidate Davison.
Well, I think one of the things is that people in District 41 and in districts across the state, they lead busy lives, and they don't have time to listen to all the debates and all the issues that are going on. And so a lot of times what we rely on is their school board members or their city commissioners or their county commissioners or people that are advocating on behalf of some particular issue if you have a child with a learning disability. And so as much as we try to connect and return emails and do those kinds of things, those are the people that we stay most connected with because they are other elected officials that are hearing from their local cities and their local things. Just a thing on the Sunday closing law. You know, I certainly respect Brandon's opinion on the Sunday closing law, but it was a little disappointing that he started this whole notion, went on the radio, went on the TV, did all this stuff with Sunday closing, and then just dropped it. Just dropped it cold. I signed up to get names and signed them up. And so I'm not sure if he was real serious about it or if he was just trying to get attention to run for the legislature, but he just dropped that issue cold. So I'm not exactly sure where he is on that issue.
Candidate Thomas?
To stick up for Brandon, my running mate, I do happen to know him personally and that he was very invested in it and had no concept of running for office until well after he had started this campaign and was involved in it, so I can speak to that. He also fostered a Facebook town hall that we conducted as candidates, which allowed our constituents to contact us on Facebook, raise their issues. I've been a customer service representative my whole working life after I left education, so I'm very familiar with listening, learning, and solving problems. Attesting again to Pam's responsiveness when they were changing the insurance for the City of Fargo employees. I contacted her with the concern I had on that, and again, she was back to me within a day and continued to correspond back and forth till all my questions were answered. So if we follow in her footsteps, we'll be doing a good job.
Candidate Anderson?
Thank you, Paula and Brandon. And just as a side, it took me 3 months to convince Brandon that it would be a really good idea if he would be my running mate. So my email's out there, my phone number, I listen, I get back as soon as I can. I was knocking on the door last week and a woman answered and she goes, "Oh, I sent you an email and you answered me right away. Thank you very much." I agree with Al in the sense that it would be nice to have town halls. There'd be something to get more input with all of our households. And, you know, we only have Ruby Tuesdays or something. I mean, there just really isn't a place where the rural people, they can go have coffee somewhere. I would like to get more input. And all we can do is just encourage people to write us, call us. You know, we don't even have a down street. They can't even stop us anywhere. So I don't know.
It's cold in the winter all the
And
time.
it's cold in the winter, too, I agree.
Okay, all right, so our next question, we'll start with Candidate Maidenwald. What can be done to improve health care in North Dakota?
That's a great question. I think obviously one of the things that as a legislator we're going to have to keep our eyes on is we're going to have to keep our eyes on the on any pending litigation going on federally. Those things may come home to impact us at the state level, so we need to definitely watch out for those things. When you see the workforce issues that we have in our state, they certainly impact healthcare, and we need to make sure that we still have enough people to do the job. We have a critical nursing shortage. We have critical other shortages in healthcare as well. We need to make sure that we're crafting policy that's going to go ahead and address those concerns. Finally, I want to say something about rural hospitals. My parents live in Lidgewood, North Dakota. Getting a rural situation is very, very difficult. They have a clinic. It's not staffed every even weekday. Those are things that we have to try to do our best to help small communities.
Candidate Davison?
Well, I think with healthcare, the number one issue is workforce right now, and I think we've done a good job in trying to expand our nursing programs. I have two elderly parents in nursing homes. I think we need to continue to look at how we invest in the number of beds and access to nursing homes and the types of nursing homes that we have, and really look at some data and some long-term projections in regard to long-term care. I think that's one of the areas that we may be a little weak on, and also what those reimbursements are. So you know, it's a real broad question for a minute and a half, but I guess those would be just the workforce and the long-term care side of things that would be something I'd be interested in the next session.
Candidate Thomas?
I feel that no family should go broke because they suffer a health care crisis. To me, that's absolutely inhuman. The fact that we are trying to cut away at the Affordable Care Act, which took steps to try to address this, to me is very sad. It's okay to have a policy that covers pre-existing conditions, but if you can't afford that policy, it doesn't do you a bit of good, and that's where we're headed right now. Like Senator Davison, I have aging parents in a nursing home. I'm an aging boomer myself, so I'm pretty concerned with where this is all going. I know how prohibitive the costs are and how quickly it eats away at a lifetime of savings. So again, I agree with Senator Davison. That's something we really need to start to address and study. That group, my group, is just going to boom over the next few years.
Candidate Anderson.
Thank you. It's a large healthcare. I mean, but I do think there are some things that we could do in the legislature that would make a difference incrementally. One is, it is difficult in some of our professions for people to get licensed in North Dakota. We have a social worker that can work in Moorhead, but they can't work in Fargo. We can fix some of that. Those are some easy fixes. I think one thing we could do to increase nursing, because there are more people that want to be nursing than there are positions, I think we could increase the per pupil back to the higher education so NDSU says, whoa, this makes sense for me to expand the nursing program. I would love to see, health care for everybody. I know that's probably not going to happen, but I think if we do the steps that we can. Oh, and the other thing I think is cool, Medicare is coming in. We need more competition within our insurance industry in North Dakota, and I think that will make a difference too.
All right, and Candidate Carlson.
Well, I can honestly tell you that there is nothing affordable about the Affordable Care Act. We're going to differ on that because that has been and is causing tremendous problems in the healthcare industry. One thing that Pam said that does make sense is we need competition in the marketplace. We need our citizens to be able to access many different types of plans with the young thinking they're bulletproof, with higher deductibles, larger co-pays, and more plans that these people can pick from. We expanded Medicaid. I didn't think that was a good idea. Today there's 20,000 more North Dakotans on Medicaid than before. And that it costs us $20 to $30 million every biennium as that percentage from the feds declines and we have to pay more. So we need to make sure that there's competition and that we have a trained workforce. I agree about the rural access hospitals. The critical access hospitals are in trouble because, number one, they can't staff. We have 7 nursing programs around the state, each of them building a fence around themselves, and they're not coordinating to make sure that we fill the void on that workforce that we need for those nurses. So there's lots of things we can do, but there's lots of things we can't do because they're federal mandates. So there's things the state can help with, there's things that we can't.
All right. I'm just trying to boil down our final question here. So we will start with Candidate Davison. I know this was the ones that, for the candidates that had been to the previous forum, some of the ones that are duplicate were ones that people came and told us that they were going to stick around and they would like to be included again. So for like that, our previous question was one we had last time, and this is one as well. What can the legislature do to ensure that North Dakotans who do not have a street address are allowed to vote, such as people that do not have a street address, so people that do not have housing or don't have a home? So what can we, and we can even make that more broad to say, what can we do to make sure all North Dakotans that are eligible to vote are able to vote?
So I guess the premise of the question is that all North Dakotans that are eligible can't vote? That's not true. Anybody that's eligible to vote in North Dakota can vote. There's a process that you have to follow, and that was just reconfirmed by the United States Supreme Court on a 6-2 decision. I'm part of, one of my committees is Government and Veteran Affairs, and we looked at the voter ID and the voting process, and we made changes to it. And we've continued to make changes to it, at least the last two legislative sessions that I've been into. And so I was very, there's a lot of detail to it. There's a lot of questions if people that are eligible to vote are actually, or people that aren't eligible are getting to vote. We want to make sure that we have a quality election, and I think we continue to move in that direction, and I think the support from the United States Supreme Court on the laws and some of the things that we changed in the last session confirms that.
Candidate Thomas?
I think that to have a quality education, a quality election, it's important that every single person who wants to vote and is qualified to vote gets to vote in as easy a way as possible. I have a friend who moved recently who's a very intelligent person who didn't have an easy as pie experience trying to change her address for her voting. I also think we should partner with the Native communities to make sure that we can find addresses so that all of the Native population can vote as they are entitled to do, and to cover any costs that might come from getting birth certificates, some of them from out of state, so that we don't impose any undue difficulties on anybody. The more people that vote, the more representative our democracy is.
All right, Candidate Anderson?
Well, after all these last couple years of lawsuits, and we're the only state without voter registration, I think we ought to join the rest of the country and have voter registration. I feel that's the only way people are ultimately going to get to vote. And I think everyone should be able to have that opportunity to vote. And if you look at the states that do have voter registration and do it at home through the mail, the increase of the number of people that vote is significant. And I think that's what our goal ought to be. How can we increase the number of residents voting and figure it out? And I'm for voter registration.
Candidate Carlson?
Good luck with that one. The
I
rural
know.
areas, everybody knows everybody. But
I know.
I was at we had a meeting today in Bismarck, and it was the Tribal Taxation Committee. But at the end of the committee, we brought in the Secretary of State's representative to talk about the lawsuit that had happened and the result, the fact that you couldn't use the post office box to vote. But it also talked about, and I wish I could remember the exact terms he used, but if you do not have an address, there's a method that you can go, and I don't remember if it was Google or what it was, but you can obtain an address because they can pinpoint your location and assign you an address. So there's no reason why anybody can't get an address. And we have made it pretty simple. You know, you have to be 18 years old, you have to be a U.S. citizen, you have to have lived in our state for at least 30 days, pretty non-restrictive requirements, and you can come up with a utility bill, a bank statement, a check issued by the federal or state government, a paycheck, a document issued by a federal or state local government. So we have made it very easy for people to vote if they want. The courts have ruled that we're not disenfranchising people. They have ruled that we don't have to, we'll take affidavits, which means you don't have proof, but we're not going to count your ballot anymore until you prove to us that you live there. So the integrity of our voting system is strong, and I think the improvements were great.
Candidate Maidenwald?
Well, I think the real unfortunateness of this entire situation is that we are going to operate under different rules from the primary to the general. And that's due to litigation, that's due to all kinds of, circumstances, but that's going to provide hardship for people who had planned to do it one way and are now going to have to scramble to make sure that they are able to do it another. I think outreach at this point, with only 27 days or so left, is basically what we're going to have to do. I'm not wild about the changes. I don't think that that voter fraud is a proven problem in North Dakota, but at the same time, this is the situation we're in. So to answer the question, we need to make sure that we're doing as much outreach as humanly possible in these next 27 days to make sure everybody who can vote can vote.
All right, so that will bring us to our closing statements. So Candidate Thomas, we will begin with you.
I get to close first. Well, thank you once again for this opportunity to share ideas. I think it's been very interesting from several standpoints. Again, I focus on the future. I want to make sure that the young families and young people in our district can go ahead. I want to put people first and invest in societal infrastructure as well as regular programs for the people. Thank you.
Candidate Anderson.
Well, thank you. And to the voters of District 41, I really do want to keep my job, so I would appreciate your vote. And some of my top priorities would be pre-K, and I'd add it in the formula, so it's right in there with K through 12. Workforce, we need to help with tuition, we need to help with student debt, we need to give our state workers a raise. I'm on the PERS board. We just lost a wonderful employee because she's going back to private because she hasn't had a raise in 4 years, and she's got a young family. We need to help with childcare, and we need to do something about our social infrastructure. Our teen suicide is 3 times youth than the country. We need to do something with addiction. Our foster care system is in crisis. We can fix that. If we all work together, we can fix roads and we can fix suicide prevention. And then I'm a big proponent in the research at NDSU and UND that they asked for the legislature over the next couple years to diversify our economy, which would be another revenue source to get all this other stuff done.
Candidate Carlson.
Well, thank you for having us tonight. It's always a fun opportunity to actually, I hadn't met Brandon before, so it was nice to meet him as we go through, but you can tell there's a huge difference between the parties. If you listened closely to the conversation, we talk about having our businesses that hire people and pay salaries succeed, to have lower premiums for unemployment, to have better coverage for workers' compensation, to lower their tax burden because we compete with every one of these national businesses to get them here. Those are the dollars that drive our economy. Our economy isn't driven by another government job. It's driven by the private sector. We're not in a budget mess. Like was mentioned, we're not in a budget mess. What we do, we will prioritize. We're going to have more revenue coming in than we anticipated because of the rise in oil and the rise in our sales and income tax, and we're going to properly spend those on a lot of the issues that have been talked about. Nobody's against assisting in mental health. What we need is more professionals that we have trained so that they can provide the services because there aren't enough of them there. So there is a huge difference between us. I think that our party and my party has proven that we get results. You know, I was criticized 4 years ago when I said I'm going to bring home money for downtown flood protection and for the inner city protection. There's a brand new city hall over here that couldn't have been built if we hadn't built that. The promises were made and the promises were kept. We bring big ideas and we bring big results, and I'd appreciate your vote.
Candidate Maidenwald.
Well, thank you again to the League of Women Voters, and thank you to everybody that came, and thank you for the great questions. The North Dakota Veterans Home was cut by 26.8% in the last budget. That's my definition of a budget mess. I also wanted to talk about the blue laws. I think that that's a perfect example of why voters in District 41 should send me to the North Dakota House, because I fought for something I believed in, and I contacted Pamela Anderson, went and testified. If I could have gotten it through Kyle Davis in Senate, we would have gotten it done. When I couldn't get it done, I went ahead and started an initiated measure, and I promised not to take $1 of funding to pay for anybody to collect signatures, which is the hardest road to hoe. And I was offered plenty of money to do so, and I said no because promises are promises. And now I'm running for the North Dakota House to solve this problem yet again. So I think North Dakota's District 41 really wants somebody who has the passion and the drive, who won't quit to try to get what they're after. And that's what I bring to the voters, and I'm hoping for their vote.
Candidate Davison.
Yep. And again, I echo the thank yous for hosting tonight, and I would appreciate everybody's vote. I enjoy the job of being a legislator. I work full-time. I think I bring a unique perspective. I have kids in college. I have kids in K through 12 education. I'm a full-time worker as an educator. And so I think I bring a unique perspective out to Bismarck, one that is in touch with what's happening in the grassroots and what parents are dealing with, and some of the challenges that people have in dealing with kids with disabilities, problems with housing shortage. We need to invest in more housing for those that can't afford it. There are a number of issues that have been brought up tonight that I would love the people of 41 to send me back to Bismarck so that I can continue to work on those issues. And I look forward to November 6th and hope everybody gets out to vote.
We all do.
Thank you. All right, so to wrap up
The
tonight,
7th is better than the 6th.
Is it the 6th?
we just,
There's that.
it is the 6th. Yep, I have it on my notes from last night.
Get in line early.
So we want to thank the candidates especially for coming out tonight and giving their time and effort for our democracy and taking questions from the audience. As a reminder, the form at the end of the day, today it is available on the City of Fargo's Facebook page, and we'll link to that as well. I want to thank the League of Women Voters volunteers. We only have a couple here tonight, but it takes certainly a handful of people to put these events on. So I want to thank everyone who's volunteered at the events as well. We want to thank the audience and the City of Fargo for their participation and support in the forums tonight. So this is the last forum for the North Dakota side. We have a final one tomorrow in Moorhead, which is the school board. So if you have any Moorhead friends, you can encourage them to attend at the Moorhead Library. Also, just really quickly, during the break, somebody was asking me about learning more about the League of Women Voters. There is, I see, maybe 2 or 3 more membership brochures in the back. Also, you can visit our website or our Facebook page to get more information about that as well. We are just putting the final edits on our voter guide, so we have a guide that will be coming out very shortly with kind of a rundown of the 4 different initiated measures. So that's something that we'll again post online and can be shared to learn more about those. And then also our next First Friday event, which is November 2nd, which is from noon to 1, at the Sons of Norway. We went back and forth about doing a political topic, and in the end, we decided on we have a speaker that's coming to talk about the science of political polling. So if maybe you kind of want to learn more about this subject but are kind of sick of the election, it might be a good balance in between there. So join us at the Sons of Norway. And finally, I'm going to put one last plug in, vote on November 6th. Or if you live in Cass County, of course, we can vote early. So vote and encourage the people you know to vote. If you need more information, you can contact the county auditor on polling places and what you need to bring in order to vote. So thank you, everyone, candidates, participants, everyone.